Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Sally Campbell-Evans, the pastor for Congregational Care, and today I get to interview my friend, Magrey DeVega,
Hi,
our
everybody.
senior pastor. And we're concluding this sermon series called Voices of Inspiration. Today we've talked about Mary McLeod Bethune. But Magrey, what have you thought about this series?
This has been a unique and, for me, a compelling and invigorating series to conceive and to think through. I've been really amazed at the things that I've learned about the people that I've preached on. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to both you and Justin preach on Oscar Romero and on Howard Thurman. And my hope is, and at least from what I'm hearing, this has been a refreshing series for all of you. We'd love to hear feedback, what you think about these 6 figures that we've celebrated. And as we draw it to a close with Mary McLeod Bethune's life, I couldn't help but ponder a couple of days ago about the interconnectedness of these 6 people in ways that I certainly did not envision when I came up with these 6 names to begin with. In other words, how connected they are historically, theologically, how they influenced each other. We started with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who we said in the United Methodist Church is now one of 2 martyrs of the faith designated by the United Methodists. The other one is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was heavily influenced by our second voice of inspiration, Howard Thurman, who was privately counseled by Mahalia Jackson. Howard Thurman, as we just learned, was mentored as a youth by Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, who was an early champion of womanist liberation theology, which is a feminist theology specifically for the African American experience, and a liberation theology that proclaimed, as you said so beautifully last week, a liberation for the lives and the realities of people here on earth, which is very much in line with the liberation theology of Oscar Romero. So if you look at it in terms of a historical and theological family tree, what it suggests is that a person like Mary McLeod Bethune, in her own unique, distinct way, influenced a cavalcade, an avalanche of people who continued to influence many, many people, who even influenced people closer to us, Doris Ross Reddick. And I just think that's the way the kingdom of God goes, that the impact you make in no matter what a small way you think it is at the time can blossom and grow just like a mustard seed into this amazing, interconnected, dynamic body that will even outlive all of us after we're gone, if we can just do our little part.
You know, I hadn't thought of this, but somebody wrote to me last week saying, do you think Martin Luther King influenced Oscar Romero or vice versa? And I said, I don't know, but if I find out, I'll write you back.
Absolutely.
But there's another connection there of
Right.
how all these voices influence one another, especially speaking for equity, equality, and a lot of them with nonviolence and emphasis.
Exactly, nonviolence. Another connecting thread that I mentioned throughout these lives was Gandhi. Many of them influenced by the nonviolent perspective that Jesus originated in his life. Well, Doris Ross Reddick is a precious saint among us. I know that you had the privilege of doing her service back in April. She gifted to me and Sally and others in the church her published autobiography, which I've just enjoyed reading since she gave it to us. And I pulled it out as I was preparing this sermon. I thought I would read from it her recollection of her first encounter with Mary McLeod Bethune at the university. And would love to hear your recollections of Doris and you think her connections to Dr. Bethune. But she says under a heading called One Faithful Day, that's when she describes her first encounter. A few days after enrollment at Bethune-Cookman College, some friends and I were sitting on the big white benches on the lawn near Whitehall when we saw a stately lady approaching us with her head held high, swinging her cane, and with an obvious air of importance. She said, "Good morning, my lovely young ladies." And we said, "Good morning." She repeated her greeting with increased firmness in her tone. "Good morning, girls." And we repeated our response. And then with undeniable power behind her words, she said, "Good morning, girls." She firmly believed important people deserved respect. And this lady was Mrs. Mary McLeod Bethune, and we sprang to our feet and gave her the respect she was due. And then Doris talks about addressing an assembly of people, reflecting on the impact that Dr. Bethune made in her life. And this is how she concluded that address regarding Dr. Bethune. Dr. Bethune was a person who made stepping stones. And you, she points to the audience, have gone from her stepping stones to your own. What is my proof? You are here today. I am here because you are me. And I am you, and Dr. Bethune lives on in all of us. Being with you this afternoon again gives me another opportunity to thank God for allowing me to occupy space in his great big wonderful world. May God bless each of you. You can almost hear Doris's beautiful, powerful, dignified, caring voice say those words. Isn't that beautiful?
Absolutely.
I'd love for you to share your reminiscences of Doris. Yeah.
To go visit Doris Ross Reddick was like walking into a history lesson about education, her inability to get it at first, and her desire to study and become a teacher herself. Mary McLeod Bethune influenced her mightily, mightily. She would talk about that often in our little sessions. I remember her telling, well, on her bookcase, there was a wrapped up stole. Didn't know what it was, kind of like in a planter, like stuffed in there, was always close by. But that was her when she became the 1946 Miss Mary McLeod, Miss Bethune Cookman.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And anyway, that was such an old sash that they weren't even sewed on. The letters were pinned on.
Yeah.
And her daughter had a new stash made for her. It was presented to the casket that for her to wear at the funeral. 1946.
Yeah.
Miss Bethune Cookman. She was so proud of her education, so proud of the way she was able to become a teacher like her mentor. And this woman was her mentor. She really wanted to be like her. Doris's stories, though, how she continued to teach, she continued to create literature for children to learn to read, or across all kinds of barriers. She broke those down, and it was just a joy to get to know her the last 12 years.
Well, the quote that Doris loved of Dr. Bethune is what you shared in your eulogy last April, and I'm so glad you shared that eulogy with me. I was at General Conference in North Carolina. I regretted not being able to be here for her service, so thank you for not only doing her service, but sharing that quote with me, because it prompted me to look at the source of that quote. And also, one of our church members, Nancy Wynn, had shared with me a couple months ago, knowing that we were going to preach on her, that she was also familiar with Mary McLeod Bethune's beautiful poetic prayer, My Last Will and Testament. You can be grateful that I did not read the entirety of My Last Will and Testament, just the short quote that summarized it. But if you have a chance to look for it online, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, My Last Will and Testament, it is amazing. It is thorough, beautiful, and like her, just so well stated. But what I thought I would do is just read the last paragraph, because it's just a beautiful summary, not just of this prayer, but of her life. And we can almost imagine her saying it to us through lives like Doris Ross Reddick. Faith, courage, brotherhood, dignity, ambition, responsibility. These are needed today as never before. We must cultivate them and use them as tools for our task of completing the establishment of equality for the Negro. We must sharpen these tools in the struggles that face us and find new ways of using them. The freedom gates are half ajar. We must pry them fully open. If I have a legacy to leave my people, it is my philosophy of living and serving. And as I face tomorrow, I am content, for I think I have spent my life well. I pray now that my philosophy may be helpful to those who share my vision of a world of peace, progress, brotherhood, and love. Mary McLeod Bethune. What an influence and what a teacher. And in fact, one of the questions I ask in my reflection questions from the sermon is, who's your most significant favorite teacher in your life? And so maybe as we draw this beyond the sermon to a close, we invite you to think about who that person has been for you. I'd love to hear from you. Who's your most favorite, most significant teacher or teachers?
Yeah, 4 come to mind
Okay.
immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, just because of who we were thinking about today, I vividly remember who my first Black teacher was.
Oh, wow.
It was Miss Pridgeon. It was 3rd grade. And what I remember is how she was full of energy and wanting us to learn fun things. Electricity, I remember in 3rd grade. But I remember the day coming in the class that she was crying at her desk. And that's because Bobby Kennedy had been killed.
Oh, wow.
And she just said, "A great man has died." So that was powerful, her influence on me, just to remember that so vividly. A 6th grade teacher, Miss Dot Permenter, just made science come alive. And I'm not a science person particularly, but it was so cool. Then many, many professors in college, but in seminary, Welford Hobby helped me hone my wonderment about how to do activism in the world and also how to connect to the church.
Wow.
And he was such an influential mentor to me in seminary. So Welford Hobby, those would be some that come to mind immediately.
Wow. I mentioned a few in my sermon, 4 names in particular, but the last name that I mentioned in that sermon, I still hear in my voice and see in my ministry just because of his indelible impact on me. Dr. Tyrone Inbody was my theology professor. And, seminary for me, maybe as for you and others, is a time of deconstruction and asking hard questions you never thought you were allowed to ask. But it has to have a period of reconstruction so that you graduate from seminary formed in some way rather than unformed or disformed. And Ty Inbody reformed my theology in a way that still impacts who I am. The problem of suffering and evil is one that I wrestled with that nearly had me walk away from the faith many, many years prior. So his introduction to me of process theology in particular and showing me how to think responsibly about theology and to care for its consequences, particularly in the pastoral role that we have. I think about him all the time. He's still alive. I've written to him. I've dedicated a few of my books to him. And I can just see him and hear him in my ministry. I'm very grateful for him. Well, we'd love to hear what teachers have been influential to you, and we do hope that you have enjoyed this series. Would you like to close us, Sally?
Sure. Yes, friends, just remember, as Mary McLeod Bethune's life exemplified, she started with the dream of education, and she had 6 students. They went to 30 students. They went to 250 students, to so many others she influenced. Your words matter. Your example in this life matters. So we hope you'll be inspired by her and these other voices of inspiration. If you want to continue to think about it, don't forget those questions that were posted after the sermon. And also continue to dig in and get to know her better. We hope you will. If you want to join a small group and dig in with us even more deeply, check out our Next Steps page. Thank you so much for this Beyond the Sermon time and just sharing it with us.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.